have also mic so that they can hear. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, our colleagues and students in SHTM in Hong Kong. And good afternoon to all our guests from Kenya joining us online. So a very warm welcome to our research seminar. So today we have Dr. Jocelyn Goopio. She is our visiting fellow at the School of Hotel and Tourism Management, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, to present her research work. And the title of her research work is Magical Kenya. Does it attract Chinese tourists? Bridging theory and practice in developing a tourism strategy framework. So Dr. Joy Goopio, she currently serves as a visiting fellow at the school and under the Belt and Road Academic Fellowship Scheme. So her home institution is Strathmore University in Nairobi, Kenya. And Joy is also a graduate of SHTM. So having obtained our Doctor of Hotel and Tourism Management degree in 2022, just last year. So during her doctoral studies, Joy combined her full-time study student load with serving as a teaching assistant and afterward as a project associate at school here. Before joining SHTM, Joy gained considerable teaching experience and was instrumental in setting up the School of Tourism and Hospitality at Strathmore University in Kenya. And she held leadership positions in the university and professional associations, including the director of the Center of Tourism and Hospitality. She is the area consultant for East Africa for Eurocre. Joy is also a founding member and national vice chair of the Tourism Professional Association in Kenya. So a little bit more background about Joy. She obtained her bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of San Carlos in Cebu, Philippines, and a master's degree in home economics from the University of Philippines. So Joy is a certified hospitality educator, CHE, and also she holds a certification in CHIA, and she's a professional certificate and have professional certificates in facilities management. So her research interests include hospitality and tourism management education, hospitality facilities management, and sustainability, human resources, and cultural values. So a very warm welcome to Joy. So a round of applause to Joy. So I hand over to you, Joy. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Chong, for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. And to those in Kenya, good morning. I'll follow the Kenyan tradition of observing protocols. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the ones online, my friends in Kenya, my colleagues at Strathmore University, headed by the Dean of the School of Tourism and Hospitality, Dr. David Chow, and my colleagues in the Tourism Professional Association, CPA of Kenya. And I also particularly acknowledge the presence of the former Director of Tourism, the Ministry of Tourism in Kenya, Dr. Gizea Odemba, and some colleagues who are in the Kenya Tourism Board. I'm sorry if I cannot mention all your names. And for the ones present here, for the sake of those who are online, I'd like to acknowledge the Associate Dean of the School of Hotel and Tourism Management, Dr. Catherine Cho, and Assistant Dean, Dr. Sebastian Piet, and some professors of SSTM, and PhD, DHTM, Masters, and the post-master students, and postdoctoral fellows of SHTM. Karibu sana, welcome to this presentation, and all protocols observed. I may now begin my presentation. So I follow. Sorry. What happened? So I'll follow the usual process of the introduction, including the research questions and objectives, and ending with the conclusion, implications, and recommendations. So tourism, like in most countries, is a major source of foreign revenue for Kenya, contributing to its GDP and generating millions of direct and indirect jobs. And prior to the pandemic, Kenya's tourism marked a steady growth over the past 5 years. Recently, it rebranded Magical Kenya using the promotion tagline, marketing tagline of rediscover the magic. You can look at the video later on. And they first diversified its tourism products and tourist flows, focusing now on the emerging source market. And of course, precisely it's targeting the mainland China, tourists from mainland China. And Kenya received or obtained its approved destination status in 2004. And with that, it allowed it to market in China as a destination for going to Kenya, and strengthening the diplomatic relations with China. It signed the Belt and Road Initiative in 2017. And in a bid to heighten its tourism growth, Kenya developed several strategies over the years. And these strategies were guided by technical interests of commercial management and market consultants, and no reference or little reference made to academic research findings. So to address this gap, I present this study by bridging the theory and practice, highlighting some theories that is mainly used in tourism research. So the research questions, I pose a twofold question: the push and pull factor, which is the famous travel motivation theory. On the one side, from the Chinese side, what motivates them, so motivations and the cultural values. From the Kenya side, which is the pull factor, is the destination image, and looking at the tourism strategies of Kenya. I'll briefly mention the key concepts in this study: China-Kenya relations, the tourism in Kenya, motivation, destination image, and the tourism theories that would form the strategy. So China, of course, is a very important trading investment partner of Kenya. It is Kenya's largest creditor, and more than 50% of infrastructure projects owned by Chinese companies in Kenya. So the Belt and Road Initiative enhanced the bilateral economic and trade development and advanced the cultural exchanges between Kenya and China. And what's more important also for Kenya and for China, rather than for China, is that Kenya is BRI's African hub, because it is the link towards the landlocked countries of Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and South Sudan. So there are several projects. Mainly the major project of BRI is the SGR, when everyone in Kenya talking about it, and other projects. So Kenya tourism, when you think of Kenya, what comes to your mind? Wildlife. The big five, the Great Migration, safari. But Kenya is more than that. There are also wildlife and marine, and it's trying to develop its adventure, sports tourism, agritourism, health and wellness, and other niche areas of tourism. So the tourism growth in Kenya significantly is affected by political instability and terrorism. However, the Kenyan government recognized that the underperformance of Kenya's tourism is more systemic than safety related. So as I said earlier on, Kenya seeks to attract more Chinese tourists. So this is in the Xinhua News. This was the former Minister of Tourism of Kenya. And the tourist arrivals steadily increased from 2015 up to 2019, before the pandemic. That China ranked 6th in the top source market of Kenya. And significantly in 2022, which is understandably, it went down. The rank for China went down to position 19 because China hadn't opened borders by then. So when it comes to the destination image, all authors agree that it plays a significant role in the process of decision-making and destination choice. So destination image, there are several definitions that come with it, but if I take the original one of Crompton, the sum of beliefs, ideas, and impressions a person has of a destination. So I follow the model of Birley and Martin, where you have the two information sources and the personal factors form the perceived destination image, which influences the cognitive dimension and the affective dimension. So I focus on secondary information sources, which is the autonomous. Autonomous means it's non-commercial. The destination has little control over it. And that is the mass media, broadcasting, news, documentaries, films, etc. And then I focus also on the primary information sources, which are formed by actual visitation to the destination. And for the personal factors, from motivations, I focus on motivations. So motivation, although it is not the only variable that explains tourist behavior, but it is critical because it explains the reason why people travel. And there are several theories or models that have been developed to guide empirical study of travel motivations. So I highlight just the well-known theories, 5 of them. And each of these theories present set of motivation dimensions, which I will come back to it later on when I analyze the Chinese tourist travel motivations alongside these 5 theories. So with a strategy, there are also many strategies that people follow, there are many models presented, but I selected these 5, which would be within the Kenyan context, is relevant. And with that, I use these 5, integrating it with the destination image model, and I propose a framework, which would explain the fact that this focusing on a certain market, so in this particular case, within the context of this study, focus on Chinese market and how Chinese tourists are different from other tourists, their culture, their cultural values, and how would Kenya position that, considering the motivations for travel to Kenya for the Chinese tourists, and how they would develop new products so that it would address the needs and expectations of the Chinese tourists, and then how it's promoted to the tourists in mainland China. And as I said earlier on, information sources and motivations, these are the 2 factors that would form or help in the formation of destination image. So this is an exploratory study, qualitative exploratory study, really giving an overview of the Kenya tourism within the context of Chinese source market. So I employ secondary data sources from the literature, information sources and the government tourism documents to address the 4 objectives. So doing the literature review of the studies that have been done on Chinese tourist motivations, there are over 40 of them, and it's not exhaustive, it's not comprehensive either, but just to present frequency count in graphic form. I put a word cloud here, and what pops out, the words that pop out: prestige, knowledge, shopping, experience. And putting the underlying dimensions, you will see family, friends, relationship, experience. So I put the extract of the summary, the categorization of the different motivations of Chinese tourists from these authors. This is just an extract because there are 4 pages of these results. And I highlight here shopping. If you can see, shopping is in almost every motivation, depending on the motive or the purpose of shopping. If it's shopping for souvenirs, then to preserve memories, it could be nostalgia, shopping for fun, or shopping to acquire new information, or it could be even a pull factor, where shopping is an attraction, like Hong Kong. People from mainland China come to Hong Kong mainly because of the branded goods, so it's a pull factor. So summarizing the pull factors, these are the attributes. I put shopping under attractions because it is an attraction for some countries. Definitely not for Kenya, not for the Chinese tourists to Kenya. Shopping is just the last thing that we will think of. Then what I'll discuss more is the Chinese tourist motivations, the push factors. So interestingly, I map it next to the 5 theories. And as I said earlier on, each of these theory, they have proposed different motivation factors. So as you can see, the Chinese tourist motivations match or correlate with most of the motivations proposed by these theories, except business development, which I excluded here because it's insignificant. Only 2 authors put it as a motivation for the Chinese, that going to Israel and going to Kenya precisely. But that's a small percentage, something like 2.5% in comparison with the other reasons of wildlife, nature, escape, relaxation, and so on. And then on the other side, the travel career pattern of peers, 2 motivations did not correlate or did not match with any of the Chinese tourist motivations. That's isolation and autonomy. So isolation is breaking away from the crowd. Autonomy is being independent or being obligated to no one. And most probably it's because the Chinese, in the Chinese culture and with their values, they prefer, they are really with the relationship needs, family togetherness, harmonious relationship. So that's why they prefer to travel in groups. So isolation, autonomy cannot be a motivation. It's not a motivation. So with this, we can see, so then if these Chinese tourist motivations match with the Western theories, then what's the difference? It's the same between Chinese and Western. Yes or no? Yes, travel motivations are universal, but Chinese tourists, there are cultural nuances that makes them different, make them different. It's culture specific, their behavior. So many studies have shown that Chinese cultural values have an influence on the tourist motivation, and specifically Confucian values correlate with most of those motivations. So what I've done here is simply to highlight the most commonly cited cultural values based on literature review. Again, it's not exhaustive, but it is inclusive enough. So these are the 6 Chinese values. So the Chinese know them very well. For the Kenyans, sorry, there's no time to explain, but more or less it's matched with the motivations on the right side. Then I highlight harmony with nature because this is relevant or rather significant within the Kenyan context. of wildlife. Later on, we will see. So Choi and Kamochi argued that it's a big challenge to market Africa to Chinese tourists because it involves long-haul travel. Therefore, it requires more preparation, more time, more money, more effort, plus, of course, the potential risk of unfavorable destination image and unknown destination. For most people, especially from the long haul, Kenya, Africa is still a mystery. So I assess the destination image of Kenya using the secondary sources, secondary autonomous information sources. You remember it, autonomous, and the primary information sources using the travel logs or the travel diaries of the Chinese tourists who have gone to Kenya. I use these four because they have their African headquarters in Nairobi, and plus they have the English equivalent, so I could read. And research results show of the Kenya extracting the results and categorizing them into different attributes. So this is what I came up with. So if you look at this, attributes that determine the perceived image of Kenya, what does this tell you? What image would, or rather what image is portrayed from looking at those, the news about Kenya? Most of them, okay, definitely you get positive and negative images. Negative, the social environment, which always when you think of Africa, yes, you think of food crisis, drought, health issues, and of course, safety, terrorism. Whereas the rest, they are actually positive. And since these news items are from the Chinese websites, broadcasting websites, then there is the highlight of what China has done for Kenya. Chinese built, Chinese made, Chinese technology, China mobile, Chinese government scholarship, Chinese education, and so on. So for the Chinese, or for the ones in the mainland, they see this, then they'll think, yes, Kenya is good because the government is doing well and the government is doing something for Kenya. So it must be okay to go there. Even with political factors, they are doing very well. Even the National Congress, the CPC National Congress was held in Kenya some years back. And so what about the side of Kenya? This is the local Kenyan news. And this news was just on the 28th of February, 2023, just a few days after the first trip of the Chinese tourists to going to Kenya after the borders opened after the pandemic. So it would be an interesting research to do also to find out the sentiments of the Kenyan residents towards Chinese tourists. Although these are directed towards the Chinese traders, but then, yes, we could extend it into the tourism side. The secondary induced overt source, which means from the side of the marketing of Kenya, then of course they're trying, which they're doing good, trying to market and trying to advertise the first trip of the Chinese tourists. And Kenya was one of the 20 countries when the Chinese border opened. So analyzing the information sources, I chose this website, Mafengo, and there are more than 100,000 pictures posted of Kenya. So you search Kenya, and this is what comes up, and look at the impressions of Kenya. This is algorithm produced, safari, wildlife, great migration, of course. And then, interestingly, you have coffee, barbecue, black tea, ugali. These are food items. So you can associate Chinese love food, and it has a very special value for them. So I took the first 5 travel logs from a Fengwo, the first page. And again, this is exploratory. So this is, I just take the 5 just to get a sample, an idea of what travel diaries portray of Kenya. And you can see there are so many pictures. And in fact, if you're interested, you can actually do research using the travel logs or the travel diaries. You get a wealth of information, a lot of information from different aspects of it. So to analyze the text, I didn't focus on the pictures as a text. I used the model of Ickner and Ricci, another famous theorist about the destination image, and mapping out the description of the travel logs along the functional, which is the direct observable or measurable, and down to the psychological characteristics, which are less tangible, and then from the attributes, which are the personal characteristics of the destination, and to the holistic one, which is a mental picture or physical characteristic or general feeling of the atmosphere or mood of the place. So the result is this. So I'll give you 10 seconds to look at it. I know they're so small. What image would you get of Kenya looking at this? So some of them I categorized, others especially on this side, especially on the side of these are verbatim. Magical, like a fairyland, fantasy world, fairy tale. So somehow, yeah, I mean, magical Kenya rediscovered the magic works, more or less. And the holistic psychological side, interestingly, they look at an animal and they associate it with something like the cheetah. When they describe cheetahs, I only put a few descriptions here, but beautifully described that signifies solitude, elegance, agility, and many others. Now, looking at the functional attributes, well, these are the common characteristics of great migration, wild animals, and so on. So what I highlighted here are the negative part, the negative image of Kenya. Work, pace, super slow, low efficiency, and Nairobi traffic jam. This is the unpleasant experience with the Maasai village and the Maasai market. So these are what would be highlighted and what the government could look at and see what can we do about this negative image, because this is what the tourists going back to China portray, and they complain about these things, and it might overshadow the good picture or the positive image of Kenya. So going deeper into the travel logs, you can also look at, or you can also extract some motivations from these texts, which I didn't focus much on this because I was just looking at the descriptions for destination image. But somehow, like looking at this one said, when I came back from Kenya, I seized every opportunity to show off to everyone. I tongue-kissed a giraffe. So all tourists, Western Asian, would go to Nairobi Nairobi Giraffe Center to be kissed by a giraffe. So it's what? Prestige. No, I mean, you can show off, wow, I kissed a giraffe. And you have novelty, to sleep in a camp, a tented camp, right there in the middle of nowhere is just unbelievable. Or you say combining luxury of modern civilization because they stay in a five-star high-end tented campsite. So it's really beautiful. And you are there in the primitive world, surrounded with the animals, nowhere inside, it's only the hotel and you and the animals. And you drive 6 hours to get to civilization. So somehow there is that harmony, luxury, and then primitive. And you have Hakuna Matata, no worries. So escape, relax. And then, of course, harmony with nature. This interesting, especially at the bottom part, where these tourists describe that most usually you want to interact with the destination. That is what tourists want. But trip to Kenya is bound to be different because the animals are masters. So you are just an observer and you quietly be a bystander, observe them because animals in this place are the masters. So curiosity, self-enhancement, or you could drop it there. Also, interestingly, in the travel logs, you can also go deeper into how they reflect Chinese culture with the Kenyan environment or the Kenyan tourism experience. They cite the famous philosopher Lao Tzu, then this poet, and of course from the CCTV Animal World. I think this is the most probably he's the equivalent of David Attenborough of the National Geographic. So I haven't seen this Animal World. So now looking at the Kenya tourism strategies, Tribe and Paddison analyzed different strategies of several countries, and they pointed out, particularly among them, the Kenya's national tourism blueprint that are facilitated by these marketing management companies, commercial, and so they demonstrate traditional tourism strategy approach. And but it's fantastic. The national blueprint of Kenya is the basis for other strategies from 2018 to 2030. So with that, I analyzed the strategies using the framework that I have suggested earlier on, and they don't. So they satisfy the four, but not the focus. Now, and I say that I've only done like a framework analysis. So I am not analyzing the effectiveness of the strategies or what they are missing and so on. I'm simply looking at how they have dealt with differentiation, diversification, positioning, promotion, and focusing a specific niche market. So only the last, the new vision for Kenya's tourism sector. This is the new strategy which came out in 2022 that specifically focused on the Chinese tourists. And they derived lessons from other destinations and identified barriers for low Chinese tourist visitation as image perception. So the image of Kenya is still that of Africa in general. Yeah, so then one of the ones who wrote the travel log said that when she said that she was going to Kenya, then the first thing they said that, oh my God, are you crazy? What are you going to do there? I mean, it's full of malaria, viruses, diseases. No, it's so messy, it's so dangerous and so on. So yes, that's the image perception of most people. But if we saw previous analysis, image perception from the tourists have gone there and from the news or the Chinese news is actually positive. The negatives are very few. So the Kenyan government can look at that and see what are these negative aspects that we need to work on. So for example, in the previous analysis, it says Nairobi, all of them, the 5 said thieves and robbers, not safe. And yet in the strategy, it claims Nairobi as the core tourism experience, well-known, vibrant African city. And they want to improve packaging of the city products, shopping, eating, entertainment. And remember in the shopping, the Chinese tourists had a negative experience with the Maasai market. I mean, they were almost forced to buy and so on. And with the eating, food is symbolic status for the Chinese culture. So they also mentioned that they couldn't find authentic Chinese food except by going to the supermarket and then to buy foodstuffs made in China, sold in Kenya. And then they go to Chinese restaurants. One Chinese restaurant satisfied to say, yes, more or less, this is authentic. So, and then also culturally, Chinese tourists exercise caution when interacting with the locals. Now, when you go to Masai Mara, it's always like part of the package that you are taken to the Maasai village and they dance with you and you dance with them and embrace you. So the five of them said, no, they don't want to go back to Maasai village because they don't want to be embraced by the Maasais and they don't want to dance jumping up and down with the Maasais. And so that's something that the Kenyan government could look at and say, okay, what can we do about it? Maybe for other tourists, we're happy with it, perhaps the Western, but not for the Asians. And then interestingly, Chinese tourists are attracted to national scenic spots that are connected with legends or stories. And the interpretation of the scenery takes a different meaning and perspective. So this was the author cited this Chinese proverb that says, the mountain does not have to be magnificent as long as there's a story behind it. So interestingly, talking of the mountain, Amboseli National Park has a special appeal to the Chinese. Yes, Masai Mara is famous, but Amboseli is special. And then because it has both mountain and water. Now, these two elements unite to form the Chinese word for landscape. And then the Chinese character, the Chinese would know this, and which is essential to the harmony of nature. And besides that, in Amboseli National Park is the mountain Kilimanjaro, and it's famous. At least 3 out of the 5 that I have assessed talked about the snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway. And one described how she read the story of Hemingway, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and when she saw that in actual there at Amboseli National Park, and then this was what she wrote. Kilimanjaro is a kind of yearning, life and death, too peaceful, too unreal. So the Chinese tourists associate their experience with the movies that they have seen, with the books that they have read. Karen Dixon out of Africa, also a famous one, and there's a museum for that. So Chinese tourists go there and take photos. And of course, Lion King. I mean, all the animals that they see, they call the lion Simba, they call the watchdog Pumbaa, they call the hyena Shenzi, and any big bird that they see is Suza. I don't remember. So that's an interesting aspect in terms of marketing. We could highlight that using these movies. And then for the Chinese tourists, it is like a must to see the Great Migration, but not just the Great Migration, but the crossing of the river, the Mara River, and especially if a wildebeest is being eaten by the crocodile. And they watch for that and see there are no crocodiles, they're not eating, even if wildebeest are already crossing, migrating, they still are not satisfied because they want to see the crocodile eating the wildebeest. Why is that so? Because that is how it is marketed there. So these are websites, it's marketing a different site, but the main thing is the crocodile trying to eat this poor wildebeest. So this is something that needs to be addressed if we want to diversify and differentiate the products, then move away from migration and target Chinese national holiday of January, February, March, and the Chinese New Year and the Chinese national holiday, October, November, because the migration happens in between July and October. And now the marketing is saying legendary. So just the word legendary, remember they like to associate with something of legends. So marketers use that term. And so to summarize, Kenya tourism strategy should pay greater attention to the motives, the Chinese tourist motivation, and destination image perceived by the tourists, so that they can know how to diversify and position and focus, or rather their promotion to build more this destination. And understanding this, like for example, they can design marketing guidelines that will address Chinese cultural preferences, legendary stories of the mountain, Kilimanjaro, on Kenya, market that, or come and watch snows of Kilimanjaro, etc. So the new tourism strategy of Kenya in 2022 has actually outlined several things. Sorry, my online thing. They outlined several things that they are doing already of marketing it. The Magical Kenya site with the Chinese translation, and then Weibo, WeChat. So reaching out to that. But yes, a lot more can be done through the research. Now, of course, this study has many limitations because, as I said, this is exploratory, preliminary. So it can generate more research directions and focus more on the research directions for the interest of the ones here. You might get encouraged to do research about Kenya and China. With literature review, you can do meta-analysis to discover the research trends of the different studies. As I said, there are more than 40 and up to 2018. So a few more after that have come up. And as I mentioned, travel logs, text mining, or maybe analysis of pictures, very interesting. And I would recommend that this will be done from the emic perspective. So one who is really native of local of mainland China, who understands Chinese and English, who can read the travel logs in Chinese language, because then you get the nuances of the culture and the values of what these diaries, the tourists write. And the impact of Kenya-inspired movies could also be added. And then finally, from the economic perspective, the industry relationship and infrastructure projects under China's BRI could be examined against the Kenya's tourism growth. So I suggest, as a researcher, we always say it's good to immerse ourselves in the research setting. So I encourage you to be an observer or a participant in the tourism experience of Kenya. So come to Magical Kenya and rediscover the magic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. Very interesting presentation. So let's have
thank you. So shall we have probably
our audience here for comments and questions first, then or maybe the online participants might have questions and comments. So either online or our audience here. So comments for Joy. Yes, Danny.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So I would like to ask, like, so far.
Sorry, Danny, I just have we mute the. Yeah, yes. Yes, Danny, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you Thank you very much, Joy, for the presentation. I think I mentioned to you that when I went to Kenya, I did a little bit planning process for my family. So I wonder, like during your research, have you actually thinking about segmentation for the Kenya tourists? Because I guess even Kenya Tourism Board, they promote a lot on the tourism, but the trip to Africa actually is not suitable for all the people. Like speaking of my own family, some of them, they are pretty hiring of the flights because it take like 20 hours to reach the destination. And also before you go there, you actually have to take a lot of injection. So for some aged senior tourists, I don't think it is a very feasible trip for them. So I wonder, like for the tourism board, have they actually having some databases for them to look all the previous visitors from China to Kenya, and whether they are planning to do any segmentation? Because for marketing strategy, you segment your target and then you target and you positioning. So whether this will be a more suitable strategy for the tourism board, I would just like to hear your comments on it.
Thank you, Danny, for that question. Yes, there has been segmentation, especially in the current tourism strategy of Kenya, the new vision. Specifically for the Chinese market, they've also looked at the segments of tourists that come to Kenya. However, I cannot really say what's the basis for the segmentation. Because although there are data, yes, there's a tourism satellite account that has been prepared for the Tourism Research Institute of Kenya. And but that is yet to be tested, in my opinion, of how effective would that segmentation be and what's the basis for that segmentation. But yes, you're right. It would be good to look at the segment. I didn't include that in the study because it's too much already. What they were also talking about marketing and targeting the wealthy Chinese and tailoring the products for the high-end hotels there. Recently, Marriott has already opened a resort hotel within the Masai Mara center, the national park. So yes, that would be another interesting study to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for the questions. Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. My name is Ken Kamoche. I'm from the University of Nottingham in the UK, just visiting PolyU for this week. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to hear you speak about my country. I also did a study, which I think you cited, Choi and Kamoche, 2017, but we did a paper that came out a year and a half ago. And I was very interested in the comment you made about the approach that the Kenyans have been taking to attract Chinese tourists. I'm sorry I missed the first part, so I don't know whether you're talking about mainland Chinese or whether you talked about Chinese in general, because our study focused on Hong Kong tourists going to Kenya. But you made a very interesting point about a suggestion, actually, that they should be thinking more about the social psychological motives of tourists. And that's very right, because if you look at the historical context, how tourism has come about in Kenya, geared very much towards attracting the Western tourist over the years, beginning about 100 years ago, when the whole purpose was to go hunting with guns, with weapons to kill animals, to shoot animals as a sport. Of course, that has changed, but the whole mindset is still there. It's very much about experiencing these exotic, wild, as it were, and pretty much forgetting that perhaps the Asian perspective is very much about the cultural experience. And this is something that I've actually discussed with people at the Kenyan Tourist Board, saying to them, you need to change your perspective. You need to modify your paradigm, because the whole idea of just being immersed or imagine yourself in the sort of animal world, animal kingdom, it only works up to a point. You need to inject a historical perspective. You need to inject a cultural experience. So I was very glad to see that this is an idea that you're suggesting, which I hope will generate some more research in that direction. So it's not really a question, but just an observation. Yeah. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kamochi. I was expecting to see you online. I thought you would attend online, but glad to see you face to face. Yes, thank you. I think there's okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I felt very interesting experience that I visited Kenya that in 2018 and as a volunteer, and here I want to ask what's the definition here for the Chinese tourists? What are their travel purpose, and maybe do you know the profile of the tourists to coming to go to Kenya of the Chinese tourists?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. So the focus of this is to Chinese from mainland China, precisely because of the Belt and Road connection between the China and Kenya relationship. And in terms of the profile of the tourists going to China, to Kenya, which is similar to Danny's question, I focus on leisure tourists. That's why precisely whether Chinese tourist motivations, I deleted or I excluded the business tourism because it's a very small percentage. Well, there are Chinese who go to Kenya specifically to find out if there is a business possibility. And that's the perception of the Kenyans about Chinese going to. I saw a blog or a comment in TripAdvisor that say, no, Chinese just want to come to Kenya because they want to invest. Well, not the tourists. So I disregarded, we didn't consider that part, but looking at those who really want go to Kenya because they want to satisfy these motivational needs, and then the full factor of going to Kenya as a destination image. Thank you.
So I think her questions is also about, some of the data, data on Chinese tourists, who are they, how long do they stay, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that those will be available from the tourism board. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that will be available. They have data for that. But I know Dr. Kamochi's, Professor Kamochi's study top of Hong Kong and Macau as Chinese, because there's no segregation in the data from Kenya, whether it's from mainland, from Hong Kong, or from Macau. So that would be a challenge to get really segregating it as a data, Chinese from Taiwan, Chinese from Hong Kong, Chinese from this.
From different regions.
Yes, so we can lump them into Chinese tourists. But then in this study of the literature review, the 40 articles, they are examining the Chinese tourist motivations from mainland China going to different countries, mainly to Hong Kong and around Asia, then of course to Israel, to Australia, and to other countries in Africa like Kenya. One study was about Chinese tourists going to Kenya.
Okay, so we have one question online. Does technology contributions such as social media among the growing young tourism consumers in China positively influence Kenya destination image and perception? So from your research, from the social media, do you see more positive messages or from the young tourism consumers in China? Do they evaluate very positively about Kenya's destination image?
Thank you for that question. Yes, precisely in the travelogue. The travelogues, the first 5 those are young people who posted, and I didn't really extract their destination plan and how many days they were there. That could be another area that you can study and see the tourist mobility, tourist flow, just basing on the travelogue, because they describe from day one when they reach and they stay for how many days up to the last day, describe the food, describe the which animal they saw on that day, what it did, etc., with all the photos. And the majority of these are young people. And so yes, social media plays a big role. Precisely, that's why we need to focus on that, and especially social media from the side of the Chinese, from the mainland China, because they will not look at social media of Kenya. They will look at social media, the Weibo, the WeChat, and all those other popular sites. So that is where the Kenyan government would need to address. They're trying, they have some channels in WeChat where they put with the Chinese language of that. But yes, a lot more still needs to be done. But again, I emphasize, it has to be based on research. So bridging theory and practice, we can achieve, I think, a lot more if there's partnership between academia and the industry. Thank you.
One last question from the online audience. Do you know how is the spending pattern of the Chinese tourists? The spending pattern.
Yes, thank you, Pauline, for that question. Very interesting. Of course, all countries focus on the spending pattern of the Chinese because they spend a lot. They have money to spend when they travel. I didn't focus on the spending pattern. Yes, I've seen some studies on that. And in this particular study, it's really not within the scope of this study. But yes, there are data on the spending pattern. There are statistics on that. And even in Kenya, in some statistics from WTTC, I have seen that from other national and international websites. Statista also gives the spending pattern of the Chinese, and which is what in the new strategy, they want to capture that. That's why they want to get wealthy Chinese to come to Kenya.
Okay, so perhaps we'll take one more questions from our audience here. We have answered a couple of questions from the online audience, but let's say here for our, yes.
Thank you so much. The above discussion remind me a question, because the data you analyze come from the online website. So I suppose that there are many other generation like the elderly in Kenya, maybe not included in this research. So I think maybe the following research could be pay more attention to the elder generation.
Yes, thank you, which is also connected to Danny's question that the segmentation. Yeah, so you have family group and then you have the elderly. So in the new tourism strategy, yes, they tried to focus on that. There is this segment of the elderly, which is like that a growing majority. And then you have the segment for families and then the independent, young, adventurous people. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for your questions. I've never been to Kenya, but I think it is not an easy, trip for elderly. I don't know, Joy, what do you think? Because as Danny said, there might be physically demanding for walking a lot, maybe walking a lot because there are so many things to see. So I don't know, this is a very interesting to see how Kenya tourism board can cater to the needs of the elderly, in how do they accommodate their needs in visiting the destination, which is really magical. We all know it is really magical, but how do we make it like dreams come true for everybody? We all have different kind of fantasy and dreams about Kenya, I believe. So yeah. So do we have any other?
One more question from Juma.
Okay, one last questions here. Yeah.
So if KTB, the Kenya Tourism Board, should focus on heritage aspect as opposed to common migration of wildlife. Yes, Kenya has has wealth of experiences, yes, and resources for that in terms of culture and heritage. But it's still undeveloped, although it is said that it is the core tourism experience, culture and heritage, but it's still overshadowed by the wildlife and the great migration. So that has to be worked on, because there are many museums and many in the different countries, beautiful immersion in the culture. And so there's a lot more that Kenya can do. And if we back it with research, then yes.
Yeah, there's a lot that Kenya Tourism Board can do, and there's a lot for tourism researchers to do as well. Because when Joy was working on this topic, there wasn't a lot of literatures about tourism for Kenya. And you know, in here, our audience, we have some Korean colleagues here. They are interested in, you know, to see. I don't know, you know, whether Korean tourists will. I'm sure they will also be interested to go to Kenya. So Joy, do you have the statistics of what about in Asia besides China? Which other countries have tourists who will be interested? I'm just wonder, like Korean tourists will be interested to go to visit Kenya as well. You have one slide at the very beginning, which shows all the different countries.
Yes, so from Asia, China is the second. India is first.
Oh, India is the first. Oh,
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we can see here, yeah. So, is there Korea there?
No, Korea hasn't featured
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. So, I don't know why, you know,
top
I'll leave it to
30.
the researchers to.
Yes, I think they're still
consider.
scared. I mean, I think because there is no relations yet between Kenya and South Korea. There are no
I see.
diplomatic relations, so they need to establish diplomatic ties so that the
I
Koreans
see.
can go to Kenya. They are still a small minority. It doesn't feature in the top 20 or the top 30 most markets.
I see. Interesting. Yes,
Yes,
it's no direct flights.
also, yes,
Yeah.
yes. One factor also with the Chinese tourists is that there's a direct flight from Guangzhou to Nairobi. But then now the Chinese tourists are clamoring that there should be direct flight from Beijing to Nairobi, and that they'll get more tourists, because from Guangzhou from Beijing they have to travel to Guangzhou or take another airline and then stop over in Dubai, or so they find it quite complicated. It's a long haul travel, so it's far. You take 20, how many hours then you took? So it's really long. By the time you reach Kenya, you're already tired. So you just want to rest after that.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There was one question here about the Chinese trade fairs in Nairobi. Yes, there are many activities of China in Nairobi. So many having trade fairs and Chinese Lantern Festival, Spring Festival, etc. And yes, there are also trade fairs in China, and Kenya actually goes there. And that would help more having trade fairs in China than China having trade fairs in Kenya. Thank you, Festus.
thank you. Thank you, Joy. You know, a lot of hard work for Joy. And if you are interested in tourism for Kenya, please contact Joy, because when she was working on this project, she actually thought about what kind of research topics, you know, ideas can be developed from this project. So the last slides she has many future research directions which you might be interested to look at in the future. So once again, thank you, Joy.
Thank you
for coming here, and also thank you for all the online audience for joining us. So yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, is it?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kenyans. Hello, Philip.
Hello, Joy. Thank you for your presentation. Very insightful and interesting. Great to
Thank
hear
you.
from
Great
you.
to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
Here's my card.
Yes, thank
If
you.
you had more cards, I would have.
Thank you for, thank you, great.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
great.
this week.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. Watching from Kenya.
Yes.
If you'd
Actually,
like
I've
to
read
speak
it
to my
before.
call.
Yes.
So I'm sure she'll be. Yes, yeah, yeah, she's listening. No, it's the eye. It's technological and thing. So it's good to see that there's more one.
So when is it?
It will be made,
Yeah.
then they say that for you.
I'm based.
I don't have
here.
to join.
But I will share with you guys.
For
Free.
now, I'm based here.
Yeah, but they say that.
But I will stay.
Oh, okay.
You-
If I have time, I will.
Yeah,
join.
sure, I will share the information.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for supporting.
For the happy emotions of the page.